Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Exchange Talk hosted by the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. My name is Bethany Whiteside and I am one of the members of the Research and Knowledge Exchange Department at the RCS. Tonight's talk is being led by Debbie Norris and is titled A Waulking Song, Exploring the Trad in Narrative Ballet. Debbie is a PhD student here at the RCS and her research focuses on the choreographer Cathy Marston and the narratives of narrative ballet. However, tonight's talk is focused on her own choreographic practice and most recent collaboration in the field of folk ballet. So, A Waulking Song was first presented at Counterpoint in New York in February of this year, when the world was a slightly different place. Debbie and Anna will be, sorry, I should have mentioned Anna. Anna is a collaborator of Debbie's and will be leading the talk with her. So a few housekeeping points before we begin. The link for live captioning is in the chat box, so please do have a look at that if you would like to use the live captioning. The Q&A box is on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Please do feel free to type up questions and submit them as the talk is progressing, and then we will go through as many of them as possible afterwards. People can say hello to each other in the chat box, and I can see a lot of you are doing that already. It's really nice to recognise so many people's names. And I've had a quick look at the participant list, and there are lots and lots of modern ballet students with us today, which is especially nice to see. Because Debbie and Anna will be talking together, you might like to toggle between speaker view and gallery view so you can see them both together. Emily Doolittle has just commented to say she can't see the link for the live captioning box, so I'm just going to paste that again because it was right at the top previously. Okay, I've just pasted it once more, so hopefully people will be able to see it. Debbie and Anna are going to talk for about 30 minutes and then we'll move on to the Q&A and the discussion. Thank you very much, Debbie and Anna.
Thank you very much, Beth. Just make sure that Anna's with me as well. Thank you for the really nice introduction and thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. I'm really thrilled to be here to represent the dancers within our current PhD cohort at the RCS, and I hope that this talk will bring some insight into my research and my practice. So before I start the actual presentation slides, I need to introduce my good friend and collaborator, Anna Esslemont. Anna is a classically trained musician and BBC Folk Award winner and has played with many folk artists internationally. And I'm really glad she can be with us here this evening to talk about our collaboration and to share some live excerpts of the score she composed and arranged for our ballet, A Waulking Song. Hi, Anna.
Hi everybody.
Anna and I are both based down in London, so sending you all wishes up to Scotland and for anyone else who's listening around the country.
We're hoping to move up at some point fairly soon, as soon as they let us, just so you know. I'm going to just turn myself off, Debbie, until you need me later on, okay?
Great, thank you. I also want to say that we have our two other collaborators with us here virtually, and they've joined to watch the talk. So Anna Hymas and Melissa Braithwaite are here. So if you have any questions specifically for Melissa, who's the dancer, and Anna, who's the artist, visual artist, then please feel free to ask questions for their element of the process. So technology, let me share my screen. Okay. So in this talk, I would like to highlight some thoughts about the current position of women ballet choreographers and composers in the development of narrative ballet, and to share my recent choreographic work that explores the relationship between ballet, traditional folk music, and their common ground in storytelling. My PhD focuses upon the work of Cathy Marston, a British ballet choreographer who has recently received accelerated success with her works Jane Eyre for Northern Ballet and the 2020 production of The Cellist for the Royal Ballet. Whilst my PhD project is non-practice research based, it is through my own work as a choreographer I have discovered a greater understanding of the process for creating narratives in a balletic form. Thus, I am able to analyse and translate Marston's choreographic processes and style more implicitly by identifying methods within my own work. The role of the woman choreographer has been the focal point of much debate within the dance field for some time. Dance critic Luke Jennings asked in The Guardian in 2013, where are all the women choreographers? Since then, there have been various articles published and conferences held to answer this question. There have also been choreographic investigations to demonstrate what inadvertently makes a work female. The experiment, held at Trinity Laban in 2013, was hosted by Holly Noble and Jane Colston, founders of the Female Choreographer Collective. 6 new short choreographic works were performed to an audience who had received no information prior to or during the event about the choreographer's identity. A socio-cultural game perhaps, but the outcome suggested that perhaps audiences are not always influenced or aware of the choreographer's gender or identity in receiving their work as a whole. Whilst there appears to be more women choreographers working in contemporary dance, there is still a dearth of women making ballets, especially for the elite international ballet companies. Since 2013, the issue has certainly been addressed, if not yet resolved, with both English National Ballet and Birmingham Royal Ballet offering triple bill programmes that were choreographed solely by women. I fear these appeared to be slightly tokenistic. A 1-week run at home hardly allows the same exposure as an international tour, but it has been comforting in the past few weeks to see some of these works included in their online seasons. You may be interested to watch Marston's The Cellist, which will be streamed on the 29th of May. It's a wonderful narrative work that shows the life story of famed cellist Jacqueline du Pré. However, the question remains as to why women choreographers are not as commonly invited to create or restage new works for the larger ballet companies in comparison to the male contemporaries. And also, why are there less women interested in choreographing for the ballet? Drawn to this debate for some years, I've always dabbled in ballet choreography alongside creating contemporary dance works. Thinking about my own position as a woman choreographer with an interest in telling stories through movement, I have been a victim of this situation, whilst perhaps subconsciously being aware that there are so few women making ballets that they can then not act as mentors and bring inspiration to emerging choreographers. And I think there's a larger question at stake here about teaching young women how to choreograph for the ballet specifically. I believe there's some slightly different practices in comparison to the contemporary dance world. So within my own practice, in the same year that Jennings published his article, I was invited by Julia Gleich to be part of their annual platform Counterpoint. Julia Gleich is a lecturer in ballet and choreography, now living back in New York, and she produces this annual event in collaboration with Jason Andrew and their organisation Norte Mar, based in Brooklyn. Their objective is to offer opportunities to artists to create interdisciplinary work across artistic genres. Counterpoint invites women choreographers to collaborate with women visual artists to explore the use of the point shoe. Having presented 2 works in the past at the London edition of Counterpoint, Marion's Lament in 2013 and The Frontier in 2015, I was invited to present another work earlier this year in New York. This opportunity allowed me to continue my practice research that is currently embedded in finding the relationships between the art of storytelling in folk music and ballet. So in 2018, I'm just going to give you a little bit of context where this area of my research sort of developed and started. Folk singer and songwriter Lucy Ward and I presented a lecture demonstration at the interdisciplinary conference Locating the Women in Folk at the University of Sussex. We'd begun creating a folk ballet and were really interested to present our work in a research context to really determine if there could be such a thing. Producer Rebecca Stewart was in the audience for this presentation and offered us a commission to fully realise our folk ballet, and thus the Sisters of Elva Hill premiered at Cambridge Folk Festival in 2019, winning the Fatea Magazine Award for Innovation. The hour-long ballet, The Sisters of Elva Hill, included 5 dancers, 4 musicians, and, as in most romantic story ballets, a fairy. Lucy Ward is an incredible storyteller, and collaborating with Anna and Helga Ragnarsdottir, we created a narrative ballet based on the Scottish folk tale Kate Crackernuts. However, at the heart of the creative process was mine and Lucy's initial interest in how storytelling is very much the essence of most folk music and narrative ballets, not only in the lyrics of the songs, but also in the emotional range of the tunes, which we aim to translate into movement vocabulary. Choreographically, the footwork evolved from classical ballet petit allegro, but also folk dance stepping patterns and the port de bras references, traditional arm lines found in both English and Scottish folk dance forms. During the collaborative process for Elva Hill, there was a moment within the story that one of the princesses was cruelly transformed to have a ram's head. So this is Melissa in Elva Hill, performing at Cambridge last year with another dancer, friend of ours, Gabby Orr. And I think it's really interesting that we had a story that had the stereotypical characters within the folk tale that we see in the main fairy tale ballets, the evil stepmother, the two princesses, and an animalistic transformation that can be seen in the classics such as Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. This transformation scene was conceived and developed by Anna, our fiddle player and dancer, Melissa Braithwaite. Through a series of improvisation tasks, they created a sequence in which both dancer and musician responded to the sounds of the violin, but also through the footwork and physicality of the movement's phrasing. The interplay between dancer and fiddle that they created was for me the most choreographically interesting and became the starting point for the research and development period for our new ballet, A Waulking Song. So all of that gives you a little bit of context as to how this new short ballet came about and the collaborative processes that we undertook in creating Elva Hill to really sort of work on for the next piece. And so the second part of the talk this evening is going to be about me and Anna sharing some ideas. We're going to share some films, some short clips of the work. Anna's going to play some of the tunes. So the creative process involved 4 women artists. Anna Hymas was my chosen visual artist for the Counterpoint platform. And I must say, at this point in the talk, there were 2 Annas in our creative team. So I'm sorry if it gets a little bit confusing, but Anna Hymas was the visual artist. And we both trained at Elmhurst Ballet School together many years ago. Anna then went on to study at Central St. Martin's School of Art and has established a wonderful career as an illustrator and painter. Visually, we discussed the possibility of creating costumes for the work. Anna's colour palette and the bold patterns that she creates in her work offered immediate inspiration for movement. And you can see on this slide some of the processes that we went through from being in the studio. Anna painted these absolutely gorgeous point shoes for Melissa to wear, gave us some costume designs and thoughts, and then completely took over her own living and dining room to paint about a 20-metre stretch of calico with all the patterns that influence the rest of our visual work. So personally, I am always motivated by music as a choreographer. And at our first rehearsal, Anna Esslemont came armed with some beautiful tunes, which spurred our creativity. Finally, we invited Melissa Braithwaite into the studio. Melissa is a Rambert School graduate and an apprentice dancer with Richard Alston. And she came along with her point shoes and our creative quartet was complete. So the first tune Anna played was a walking tune, which became our theme and narrative for the ballet. I want to tell you a little bit about the practice and process of walking. So walking is a traditional practice associated with making tweed. Primarily a woman's role, groups of women gathered together to walk the wool with their hands and sometimes their feet. They would saturate the cloth with sheep's urine to fasten the dyes and soften the cloth, and knead the fabric whilst rotating it in a circular pattern. In order to ease the monotony of the work and also to set a pace and rhythm, the women composed walking songs. The songs traditionally would follow a question and answer framework, with 1 or 2 lines being sung by one of the women and then repeated or answered by the rest of the group. And so now I'm going to hand over to Anna so she can unmute and come back on screen, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the first tune that we used within the process. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks. Yeah, so the very first tune that we used, actually, I first heard it from a Blazing Fiddles album. I think it was their first album. And I have to say, I've just looked up what year that was released in, because in my head it was yesterday, but it was actually 20 years ago. So old. But it's a tune, there are a couple of tunes in the set on the album, and they're just entitled Waulking Songs. And then it says traditional. So I have tried to look into where this tune comes from, but with little luck. So if anybody knows when you hear it, I'd love to know the history of this tune. It's a little bit unusual in comparison to some of the walking songs that we hear about, in that for starters, unlike sort of your normal songs where there's either a verse and then a chorus or a call and response section, and same within the folk tune tradition, we would normally have like an A section that would repeat and then a B section that would repeat. In this tune, we have an A section, a B section, and a C section. None of them repeat, but all of them are tied together with this little rhythmical phrase in the middle that just goes ba, ba, 2 simple notes. So I'm going to play it for you because it's a little bit easier to demonstrate. So the first phrase goes like this. So that last little bit, that's the phrase that kind of keeps linking these things together. So the B part is, so slightly different melodic notes there, but still the same rhythmical feel. And then the final phrase, the C part, is, and it finishes with that same phrase. And one of the things I really loved about this was the rhythms of that first bit. There's so few notes. It stays like in one place in the instrument. We're not running up and down the scales. It's like, I don't know, almost like a chant that, you know, is repetitive, which goes with the work. Because if you can imagine, you know, beating the tweed over and over and again, it was boring. You know, so they sang songs to sort of, you know, actually to have a chat. I think, you know, I've heard tales of where they were telling stories of the villages and that kind of thing. So yeah, so that's the first tune, and it was just such an interesting tune, and it kind of led to the whole story of somebody says they know the tune. I promise I won't.
I'll get questions at the end.
So very excited to look at what that message says. Debbie, I believe, has a little bit of a clip to show you how that tune works within the dance.
Wonderful. I told Anna before we started that the knowledge exchange community is very good at sharing information and supporting, so that's really exciting news for us. We're going to start with the first clip. This is the opening of the ballet sequence. It was wonderfully filmed by a friend of ours, Stephen Speliotis in New York, and I just wanted to make sure we mentioned him because it's a really nice edit and it's lovely to have it on film at this time. So this is the opening sequence. you can see in the action of the walking fabric, it became a really important part of the choreographic process. Melissa and I worked really carefully with the fabric that was hand painted by Anna, and looking at the actions of kneading, wringing, pushing and pulling in order to create tension and contraction. Whilst we knew that the practice of walking in Scotland was mainly performed with the hands, in other areas there are records of women and men using their feet. This has allowed us to explore a variety of levels and different relationships between the dancer and the fabric. By establishing the working environment in the opening section, it was necessary to confirm the relationship between dancer and musician. The narrative evolved from the working actions, but the conversational element of the story was imposed through identifying the sense of community and humour found amongst the women in the walking circles. So this next sequence is a little bit more of the improvisation that I referred to in the work that we did for Elba Hill, with Anna and Melissa sort of responding to each other, to react to each other, physically, musically. So it's just a slightly shorter clip. I hope it works. Just to see that response and that question and answer idea through the movement. Great. So Anna, would you like to talk a little bit to us about the idea of moving whilst playing in that way and how you find it as a fiddle player to do that? Because I think it's really interesting to watch, and your physicality is really moving and emotional.
Do you know, it's funny because I never really thought about it until we explored doing the improvisation between musician and dancer in the Sisters of Elva Hill ballet, where this whole thing kind of came from. And I love movement. That kind of thing has not been a problem for me. But when you put a fiddle under your chin and you're trying to sort of play and move at the same time, it's unbelievably difficult. It's not the kind of thing, like, they don't teach you this in classical music college or anywhere along my folk music learning time. At no point did anybody go, have you ever tried expressing yourself with your body while you're playing? And it's a really interesting thing to do as a musician, because suddenly bringing together the two art forms and seeing how you can respond to one another, one through sound and the other through shapes is quite a magical experience, but absolutely flipping really hard. I think there's one point towards the end of this ballet where Debbie asked me to sort of spin in circles while I was playing a polka that crosses the beat so much, so it's not a normal thing to play, and I had to spin and then come back round and hit a load of beats with my foot. And it sounds like the most simple thing, but when you're trying to play the fiddle as well, it's hard. So I have a lot of respect for any musicians that can dance and play. You got it going on.
What was really interesting as well, we're going to look at that section in a minute, was the use of sort of you call it your stomping action, the way you keep tempo, the way you keep time. And that was actually an audible part, but also a visual part of the piece, to sort of see you make those stepping patterns as well at the same time as playing.
Yeah, and there was, like, just before the first performance in New York, actually, it was a suggestion of, what's his name, Debbie? The guy along with Julia.
And Jason.
There you go. One of the organisers of the evening, he suggested right at the beginning, so when you saw that first clip of the first walking song, and we came up to the front, and you can just about see Melissa has spread out this length of fabric, pushing it with her feet, with her hands. And then he suggested to sort of join the musician and the dancer together, that I could do a little back step on the fabric with my stomp. So in time to sort of yoink the fabric away, and then Melissa pulls it out again. And that was a great thing to do. You know, it's great to be able to use the stomp that we just take for granted as folk musicians, because it's what we hang our beat around. It's everything. But to make that into a part of the choreography was amazing.
Lovely, thank you. I'm really aware we've got lots of modern ballet students with us this evening, which is great. So the next sequence might be really interesting to them. I think Melissa would agree it's quite technically challenging. It's very quick. Anna plays this beautiful pizzicato tune, and Melissa has these various footwork patterns, and some of them really reference Highland dance. The opening of the Scottish hornpipe with the heel press is in there. Some of the placements of the feet in the coup de pied and the little pas de basques that we see in most English folk dance steps are all relevant in this sequence. It's short, it's fast, it repeats itself, and there's a really lovely camaraderie between Melissa and Anna, and a lovely sort of light-hearted sense of humour with it. Yeah, I think the speed was really interesting, and I think that takes us into the final video clip we're going to share with you before we take some questions, is the ending. I just want to say there's a really long section that we've not shown this evening that was very lyrical. Anna played the Skyboat song, obviously a classic tune, but there's a lovely long section of sort of lyrical, elegant movement that really sort of painted the landscape in the way that we created that narrative, and we really considered the environment and perhaps being sort of lost in the Highlands of Scotland. So the last sequence, yeah, I'm going to call on Anna just to talk a little bit about tempo, because as dancers we so often follow maybe recorded music, but when we have live music in the space we can play around with tempo. And Anna wanted to play this polka tune really, really fast, and Melissa said, absolutely no way. It was impossible to dance to it at normal speed, so maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, you know, it's an interesting thing, because I think it was a massive learning curve for me on working with a dancer, because normally in a folk music set, we like to sort of start maybe slow, break it down, maybe get a bit funky. And, you know, for me, the sets of tunes that I find the most exciting are the ones that just finish faster and faster and, you know, real speed. So I actually put an Irish polka, the Tolka polka, right at the end of this performance. And when we got there, it was just too fast. You know, obviously now I have a newfound appreciation of what it's like to dance on points for any amount of time. And it was just impossible to do that at top speed at the end. And I think if we were to do it again, I'd completely redo that bit of the composition and look for a new way of creating an ending with the same level of wow that you get from just playing something really fast. So big learning for me there. I think Melissa would have killed me if I took that any faster than I did on the final night.
Yeah, I think also just because we're only sharing short clips, the piece is over 10 minutes and it's a duet, but Melissa is dancing non-stop. And 10 minutes solo, if you like, in that respect, is really difficult and requires a lot of stamina. So this is the final film clip. It takes us to the end of the piece. And after that, let's have some lovely questions and we'll see if we can answer them for you. Thank you. I left some applause on the end. I think anybody who works in theatre is really missing live performance and applause. So I thought that was important just to have a little bit of a flutter. I just wanted to mention as well, maybe before we take questions, that the credits I always think are really important for the work. So it was my wonderful mum who actually made the costumes before Anna painted them all to Anna's designs. And the photography is by Jez Ward and Stephen Speliotis and also Nicola Selby, and some of the early images for Elva Hill as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned those people. And this last image here is by Mary Jane Alexander, who actually came and painted our rehearsals, which was an absolute joy to have somebody actually in the rehearsals and painting as we moved and as we created. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm sorry for the technical problems, and I hope Beth will come back.
Yes, Beth has come back. Debbie and Anna, thank you so much for that exchange talk. As you know, I get particularly excited when dance is the focus, and I think it's really important that the art form is represented. I also wanted to thank you for persevering and using the clips. I also think it's important that when we talk about dance and music that we want to show them, we want to show the practice. So I'm really glad that that was part of your slides as well. First off, we've had comments from Isla Ratcliffe and Emma Tomlinson for you, Anna. So I understand the tune is from the Joseph and Patrick MacDonald 1784 collection. I can email this to you afterwards.
Yes, please.
So worry about finding a pen. And Emma passed on the title of the piece, which I don't have a great chance of pronouncing correctly, but I'm going to give it a go. Hadalolalo.
Ah, okay, that rings bells. I knew Emma would know. I knew she'd know.
There you go, Emma. I'm sure you're hearing this. So thank you to Isla and to Emma for commenting in. So I'm going to back to the first question, and I think it's one that's probably slightly more for you, Debbie. As you know, when I was doing my PhD, I was having to dance many different styles and find a way to fill them within my body that had been primarily a a ballet body, and yet I was doing salsa and line dancing and Highland and lots of different types of dance as a research method. So I wanted to ask, do you have any insight as a choreographer, and from talking with dancers, is ballet always their starting point performing step dancing, or how does it feel for them? Or do you work with step dancers who are working more with ballet? What's the sort of the starting point in the blend?
So I have spoken with Sarah Rose, who is a step dancer and looks at lots of different folk dance things. And what was really interesting, I'm not a folk dance specialist at all, and I'm learning as I go through this process. But what was really interesting from her was she came to watch Elva Hill, and she saw it in process and she saw it in performance. And she said, do you realise that you're doing such and such a Morris step here? And do you realise that that comes from this particular area of Lancashire? And I didn't. So what's really interesting is how those steps are there in the ballet vocabulary, but their tradition and their age is probably coming from a much more folk dance practice. And obviously we know that the ballet started in the courts, and it had a more human and it was more commonly accessible, I guess, to what we see now because of the virtuoso and the facility that dancers need to do ballet. So it's still a learning curve for me, but Sarah Rose definitely said there were clearly moments that were similar without me actually doing it. So then when we made this particular work, I actually started to look at some of the Highland dances, so the Scottish hornpipe and that little heel press at the opening. So yeah, the more I watch, the more I learn, and the more I can adapt it and find the similarities across the genres.
I find it fascinating because Highland dancing has been so shaped and dictated by ballet to such a degree, and it's really interesting looking at the history of how a very dominant art form has actually affected another, and it's definitely caused tension between the two practices. I just want to ask one follow-up question, and then I'll move to some of our participants. So within the field of dance, how would you define or characterize folk ballet as a distinct area of practice?
So that's, yes, people have come to us and said, this is a whole new thing. And then I look back and I look at maybe the works of people like Kate Flatt, who've been making folk dance, and even sort of recent choreographers, I'm going to refer to men, but people like Hoffe Schechter who use folk dance in their work. But I wonder how many sort of choreographers have really looked at that link in the ballet vocabulary that we know right now. So I don't know whether it's a completely new idea or concept, but I'd like to think that it's also to do with the music and this idea of the stories that we actually want to portray, because the folk stories are different to the classical sort of fairy tales. I'm not interested in doing another Cinderella or a Sleeping Beauty. I mean, Kate Crackernuts is a fascinating folk story, and Anna's already started talking, and Lucy, our friend Lucy Ward, is like, how about this tale? And when we did Elva Hill, people came to us and said, oh, I think you should do this particular tale, and it's set in the Outer Hebrides, and you know, mermaids came up and things like that. So I wonder if the different characters and the different stories sort of make it more of a folk ballet than a fairy tale ballet.
Debbie, thank you. And your point about the personal as well leads us on to our first question submitted by Lucy, I was going to say one of our doctoral students. Lucy's actually our most recent graduate from the doctoral programme, so I need to say Dr. Hollingworth. So Lucy asks, given that such a lot of work is developed by personal recommendation, how do you view the future for women creators? Will work like this inevitably only be developed by women helping other women along?
Oh, Lucy, she always asks such good questions.
It is a good question.
Everyone talks about equality. I just want to see more women visible in making ballets. There aren't as many women making ballets, but there aren't that many men making ballets. They just seem to make more of them for more of the companies. And it's the same within musical theatre. So my thing with the education point that I tried to make is that when do we actually start teaching students, male or female, men or women, to choreograph specifically for the ballet? or are we teaching them the art of choreography, and are there any differences? And I think that's really important. I also think this idea of having women mentors or influencers in the field is important. So as we start to see people like Annabelle Lopez Ochoa and Ruth Brill and Kathy Marston herself, we're more drawn to what they're doing. And I'm starting to ask people the question of, can you tell whether this is created by a female choreographer? And do they have a more sensitive approach or a greater understanding in narrative? And I think that's what my research is definitely about at the moment. I'd just like to see more young women choreographers trying things and being influenced and inspired by those who are starting to take the lead. I know Helen Pickett made a beautiful piece for Scottish Ballet. And I want to see it, and I want to see it more often than just the 1 week or the short part of the season. I think that's important.
I think that's such a huge topic, and it's only going to be questioned and challenged by continuing to do the type of work that you're both doing. I'm going to move on to another question, which I think is geared towards you, Anna, and it was submitted by Rosie, one of our BA Modern Ballet students. So Rosie, if it's okay, I'm going to read out your question in full because it's a really interesting comment. So Rosie says, as a dancer, I find Anna's comments about musicians discovering movement for themselves very interesting, and find my base musical knowledge from playing several instruments in school-level orchestras really useful in my sort of everyday ballet life. I'm curious to know if you've taken any pure movement classes for yourself, and if you think this is something that should be explored more in music teaching.
Do you know, I haven't, but in a similar way that my path just so happened that I grew up learning classical music. So I was taught classical violin from the age of 6, but then very early on my family were into folk music. And at that point, and this is years ago, I'm old, years and years and years ago, the two things that they had issues that aren't so much a thing now. Finally, especially at the RCS, or so I hear, there's a recognition of how much the two things lend to one another. And that's just like amazing to me. I find that brilliant because I fully believe that what you get from learning folk music is a great sense of oral awareness. So which gives you a better sense of rhythm and feel without being tied to notes. Whereas in the classical stuff, what I got was my technique. And without that, I couldn't actually play. So they both lend each other perfectly. And what I think is interesting about what Rosie's asking is, I'd never even considered that before working with Debbie, that actually you could add in that movement element for musicians and for dancers alike. Because I think, Debbie, is there such a thing? I feel like I know of some musicians who've done like rhythm workshops with dancers, but I don't know of any dancers doing workshops with musicians. If it's a thing, I'd love to go. Sign me up, And
I'm sure there has been things like that have been developed. I think there's been some interesting work in musical theatre where you have musicians who play the roles within the musical, and they move and they dance as well at the same time as playing their musical instrument. So there's definitely been exploration choreographically with regards to that. But I think I guess my response to it as well is that I play piano and I play guitar very badly, and I sing and I can read music, and music was always a big part of my training. Even working as assistant choreographer on projects during my training, I always was the person with the score out, and I always was able to sort of count and find the phrasing and find the timing for dancers. I think it's really, really crucial for any dance student to have that ability as well, if they can. So great that
I'm so glad you said that, Debbie, because Rosie actually made a second point saying, I certainly think there could be perhaps more teaching of music to dance students, and she's really enjoyed doing Del Crow's through RCS.
Great, wonderful.
So it is that uniting and merging of disciplines that is so important.
There's so much to be offered from both sides, from all sides. I learned so much from doing those improvised sections, and there's so much to be gained by just coming together and exploring, I think not necessarily doing it for any purpose as well, but exploring the combinations is a very interesting thing, rather than, you know, like when musicians act and play the parts, as you were saying, Debbie, you know, in musicals and stuff. But I think slightly separate to that is exploring the movement that goes with the music, which is why Debbie and I were talking last night, and I said, I would love to write something for your choreography. Because for me, I'm quite used to sort of adding, you know, when I do session work, I'll add a violin bit onto a song that's already been written. And I love doing that. It's great. It's like finding the gap. But to do that for the ballet that's already been written, and it's like looking at something visual and going, how does that sound? And it's the reverse for you when you hear the music. How does that look? You know, have I gone completely too...
No, I don't think you have at all. I think when you're working with another art form, it can sometimes both feel like the most natural thing in the world and the most terrifying thing in the world simultaneously.
Yes, you
ordinary.
hit the nail on the head there.
And we have another question here from Laurie Watson, who actually is a former PhD graduate from the Conservatoire and now a lecturer at Edinburgh University. So I'm going to read out her question, and then she's got an example that I could give to you. So I'll give you the question first. I think it might be for both of you, but perhaps a little bit more you, Debbie. Can you tell us a bit about your artistic process, how you negotiated the relationship between creativity and historically socially informed materials? So an example she gives of those materials are lyrics of any walking songs.
Yeah, I think our process was, it had to be quite quick. We only had 6 weeks. We only had about 5 rehearsals in the studio together. So Anna brought the tune. This Anna brought the tune. From that point, the other Anna and I and this Anna went away and looked at, we read about the process of walking, the ways walking tunes were immersed into their culture and their working life. And I think my point from that, it was very brief research, but I think from that I took the physicality of the movement. And I think Anna Hymas, our artist, really looked at the patterns and the identified the textures of tweed. So we really looked at sort of what they were actually making. And then in reference to the actual music, it was about structure, I guess, like Anna explained before. But yeah, we very much bounced off each other, and it was very much, Anna just played that section, let's respond to that. Melissa did an awful lot of incredible improvisation, which I led from the front, and Melissa was great in that. We also tried to really mimic the phrasing in the music within the footwork. So the long section that we didn't show you tonight is all call and response, with really beautiful legato phrasing that Melissa sort of, so Anna played the first line and then Melissa danced it, and then so we really restructured that.
She literally reproduces the rhythm of each phrase with her feet. It's a beautiful section, yeah.
And that came from the walking songs and how they would do that. So one woman would speak 2 lines or sing 2 lines, and then everybody would respond. So we took that as an artistic process as well, that idea.
But as a process sort of in the studio of collaborating, it was fast. I mean, it was hard work and it was fast. Some of the stuff took more thinking about than others, but you know, we had such a short space of time to get a thing and make it performance ready. And it was from those first tunes, everything. You kind of, in anything like this, you have a starting point, and then some of it happens organically because it sounds right to come next. You know, progressionally, composition-wise, it just works to go into something that sounds a bit like this, and same with the dance. So a lot of it just kind of came together like that. And the plucking bit, that happened really early on. After we'd done the section before it, we just sort of thrashed it out in the studio for the first time. And there was just a pause, and out of nowhere, that phrase came. It was just like, that's where the music needs to go right now. So the following week, Debbie choreographed it. So it was pretty organic, and yeah.
Improvised phrases, and then a structuring process and a selection process of that works, that doesn't work. And also then Yeah, because this 10-minute solo, which builds and builds and builds and builds and builds, there was definitely moments later on in the process where we started to think how much stamina is needed, where can we take the breath, where a pause is relevant, how can we make that sequential, how can the narrative build and develop. So they were all sort of conversations that we were having, and it was lovely to have everybody in the studio for nearly all of our rehearsals. So Anna Hymas, even though she's here as our visual artist, she has a dance background. So if we're talking about crossover of knowledge, she was able to visually see things as well, which was really lovely to sort of engage in those discussions.
I feel like the more that you both say and respond, the more questions come up, which is exciting. Laurie's actually asked a further 2 questions, but we'll come back to Laurie's questions if there's time at the end, because Ailey Robertson has also asked a question in the chat box, which I'd really like to read out.
Yeah.
And this might be slightly more for Anna than Debbie. I'm trying to like work out a way to kind of guide you, but perhaps for both of you. So Ailey, one of our lecturers at the RCS in Trad, asks, I'm interested in hearing more about your approach to authenticity when using traditional Scottish musical material, and particularly when you reference Gaelic culture. Was there a reason you use an Irish polka at the end?
Yes. Do you know what? I wondered if somebody would mention this, and I'm totally fine. I'm Welsh, so I'm not Scottish. I'm not Irish. The simplest reason the tune went at the end was because A, I love it. B, it worked. And it's, you know, if we'd been working on something that was like, we've got funding because we said it was a Scottish piece about Scottish heritage and all of that, then I probably would have been more sensitive about just including proper Scottish and Highlands tunes in it. But as it was, we weren't confined by that at all. It was an exploratory process, and something about getting to that point in the dance, I could just hear the Tolka Polka. Admittedly, I could hear it 10 times faster than we ended up doing it. So again, had I had the chance to go back and sort of look at it from an outside compositional process, instead of being in it and needing to produce something, probably would have put a different tune at the end. But yeah, I did, you know, I wondered, would somebody ask that? And I appreciate the question, actually. Yeah, I hope that answers it.
The parameters of working for a specific event as well, because the only brief that we had for this particular platform to make this work was, it has to be women, it has to be a visual artist and a choreographer, and it has to be about point work. So trying to find rhythms in the footwork, trying to find how Melissa used the shoes, how we use the texture of the fabric. I think if we go on to develop this and we take it any further, we will probably definitely change the tune at the end. Because I think to sell a fully Scottish folk ballet, it needs to have all of those elements dressed. Smiley face from Laurie. So I very much hope you do continue this. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to read out another of Laurie's questions. So, and actually this very much follows on from the discussion that's already begun. So actually, she submitted 2 questions, and I'm trying to work out a way to ask both of them in the same question. I don't think I can do it. So I'll ask this one. Were there times when the contextual information was restrictive and you had to let it go to make space for original ideas? And by contextual, Laurie, I think here is talking about the historical and the socially informed materials. Yeah. So we were supposed to be performing lots of things at festivals this summer, and we were going to take this as a pop-up performance to a few different festivals, and the first thing we started talking about was including more dancers, because one of my restrictions in relation to the actual act of walking cloth is it's not a singular person's action. It's done in group formation, and the way that fabric gets passed from one woman to the other is really interesting to me visually. How more than one dancer can do that, can manipulate the fabric. So the actual process it's not authentic because it would be done by more than one person. So that was something that I would certainly want to do. And I think there's something really interesting about text and voice and the idea that these were songs as well as tunes. And from the reading that I've done since we made this, there is more reference to them being songs. And I wonder if the voice would be really important to include as well, possibly between dancer and Anna as violinist. I'm not sure how much Melissa will want to sing. She'll be going now. But
we're going to get a text soon.
So if it's okay, we'll leave it just there. Thank you so much, Debbie and Anna, for being with us this evening and for presenting such a wonderful and fascinating talk. I really enjoyed it. And I'm sure the participants did as well. The chat function, I don't know if you've had the chance to see it, but it's been flying with comments. So. And there's one little message for you, Anna. Emily Doolittle, one of our Athenome Research Fellows, her 4-year-old was watching the clips and loved it, but was a bit concerned about the pointy stick possibly hurting somebody.
Oh, so sweet.
So detail from the clip was definitely being picked up. A 4-year-old is very surreptitious for such things. So thank you again very, very much. Next week we have another doctoral student, Abby Watson, who again is presenting on dance, which is wonderfully exciting, 2 Mondays in a row. And the title of Abby's talk is Dancing This Practicality in the Performance of Ish. Abby, that is a stunning title. And Abby's going to be chaired by her PhD supervisor, Dr. Laura Bissell, another member of the RKE team. So that's just for me to say again, thank you very much to Debbie and Anna, and thank you to everyone who joined us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. The link will be on the RCS Exchange Twitter feed. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so very much. Thanks, bye.